Are your groups bigger than they should be? Have you tried some things but you don't know where to start? Today we're going to cover 5 simple mistakes to avoid when you're trying to get your best groups possible. I've been guilty of all of these at some point in time, and the solutions are pretty simple. Some of these won't even cost you anything to fix except your time. Stick around for at least one bonus item that's going to make the biggest difference for you in the long run. Now, the first mistake I see all the time is aiming at the point where your group is impacting. If you end up shooting out your target, the group is going to open up just because you cannot aim as well as your aim point disappears. I like to dial my scope up about 6 clicks and make sure that my aim point is always staying intact. Tip 1.5, let's call it, is that depending on the size of your aim point, your groups can open up. Your crosshairs are a big factor when you're trying to get the smallest group possible. If you're aiming at a 1/2 inch dot versus a 3/4 inch dot versus a 1 inch dot, all of these things can be a factor. Some folks are going to tell you that you need to have a 300-yard range to be able to do your load development, but a lot of us only have 100 yards relatively easy to get to. Well, no fear. Brian Litz did some very interesting research in this area and found that the only reason that relative group size could be smaller at 300 yards versus 100 is you're trying harder to aim. It has nothing to do with your projectile settling down at further distances. Sometimes if I'm doing 2-2-3 load development, I'll fire one round through my shoot and see target, and that will become my aim point for the rest of my load development. I'll make sure my center dot on my scope is covering that aim point, but it also has to do with the next tip, which is a level. Number 2 is making sure that you're always using your level. Certainly at further distances, a level is going to be more necessary to make impacts, but if you're trying to keep your groups as small as possible, your crosshairs not only need to be on the target, but your system should also be level. We're going to lean on Brian Litz again. According to him, I believe that plus or minus 3 degrees is what he quoted the human eye could resolve. With a level, you can do much better than that. This might not be a huge difference at 100 yards, but it can make a difference, and frankly, it's just good practice. I don't care what type of level you're using. If you've got a very fancy digital system, if you're using a level that's in your scope base, if you're using a level that's screwed onto your scope. Any of these options are going to be improvement over having no level at all. As long as you've done your tall target test, you're confident your reticle is going to show level when your system is showing level, is really what you're looking for, and this can make a difference. And if you're shooting out at distance, you really should have one anyway. Number 3 is a hugely overlooked thing that I see all the time, and that's not having your parallax adjusted correctly. You can absolutely make a huge difference in your groups if you do not have this figured out. To check this, you need to have your scope on a fixed target without touching it, move your head back and forth, and see if your crosshairs are moving around on your target. If they stay in the same point, you're probably good. But if they move the same way, you're going to have to turn your parallax adjustment one way, or if they're moving in opposite direction of you're moving your head, you're going to have to turn it the other. If your reticle is moving around on your target at all, you're never going to be able to see the real potential that the groups that you could be shooting. Having a consistent cheek weld is a good start, but having your parallax adjusted correctly is still very important. Number 4 is going to make some folks upset, but using a lead sled to do precision target work is just going to frustrate you in the long run. They have their uses. If you don't have anything else to keep you steady, it is certainly better than nothing. But at least for me, getting the feet back to the same place every single time just doesn't happen on my shooting bench. If you're trying to sight in something with extreme recoil, they can be of great assistance, but having a separate front rest and a rear bag has given me much better results in the long run than I've ever been able to achieve with my lead sled. Number 5 is making sure everything is mounted correctly. Very often from the factory, the spools that retain your scope or your rail or action might not be torqued correctly. Sometimes they are coated in oil and they're just going to back out over time. Often these problems will present themselves, but only after a considerable amount of time and money has been wasted poking holes in paper. I've been amazed at the amount of money that some folks will spend on all kinds of things, but refuse to spend money on things like a fat wrench or something similar. It's amazing what a torque wrench and a little bit of blue Loctite can do for your groups. Bonus tips. If you want to make your groups consistently smaller, the least expensive way to shrink your groups is going to be to dry fire. Though damage isn't common, if you feel better, you can get a snap cap and get practicing. If you practice your trigger braking without seeing the reticle move, you will quickly see these groups shrink to sizes that you never thought possible. But if your trigger is braking and your scope is moving, it's something you need to work on. Dry firing is probably the least appealing but most useful technique that most people just won't take advantage of. If you're trying to make your group smaller, a torque wrench, snap caps, and all kinds of other great tools are available at our channel sponsor, Midway USA. If you want to start hitting targets at further distances, check out this video right here, and I'll show you the top 5 mistakes that are easily avoidable for beginners to long range. I hope to see you in that video, and until then, stay safe in small groups.